Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to point out that McNally Robinson Booksellers is located in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are so very pleased that you could all join us here tonight, both physically and virtually. So hello to all those watching on YouTube now or in the future. We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of GMB Chomichuk's The Backbone of Night, which is book 2 of the Automatic Age saga. So I'd like to express a special thanks to his publisher, Yellow Dog, an imprint of Great Plains Publications, for helping to put on this evening and of course for publishing these books in the first place. I just have a few quick procedural notes before I'll get out of your hair and turn things over to the interesting creatives sitting on the tall stools just beside me. But just a few very quick notes. While you're in this space, we just ask that you all please do remain masked. Once you leave the space for the book signing, which will follow the event, at that point masks will just be a recommendation, but they are recommended. So thank you very much for putting up with that while you are in here. Following the readings and the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. At that point, just because it potentially still seems unwise for us all to share a single microphone, I will be wandering around with a microphone and will then ask you to repeat your question to me, at which point I will then relay it to tonight's panelists. Now, there is no way I will be able to convey the inevitable eloquence of your question, so I would ask that you keep it relatively short and actually keep it as a question. Rest assured there will be ample opportunity to offer any positive commentary or any further comments you might have to H Moncrief and GMB Chomichuk when they take to the signing table just outside following the event. So thank you so much. Also, the fact that my brain is essentially porridge at this point, so I will not be able to remember what you were saying very comprehensively. Following that, there will be an opportunity for a book signing. And at that point, at the end of the event, we'll just ask you all to please remain seated just for a moment while we transport these two writers to the table so that they might serve you in the manner to which you are accustomed. But without further ado, it's my immense pleasure to introduce tonight's first reader. So our special guest for the evening, H Moncrief, is an award-winning author of 16 dark fiction novels. Her City of Ghosts won the Kindle Book Review Award for Best Horror / Suspense. Moncrief began her writing career as a journalist, tracking down snipers and canoeing through crocodile-infested waters. Her articles have appeared in many publications, including Chatelaine, Flare, Writer's Digest, and the Globe and Mail. So I'll ask you all to join me in very effusively welcoming H Moncrief.
Thank you, John, as always. Best voice ever. And thank you, Gregory, for having me here. This is really awesome.
My pleasure. And just for the audience's sake, we should let you know that we've been talking about getting John to do the audiobook of Automatic Age for a while. We haven't convinced him yet, but one day.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. Best voice. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to read just a little bit of those who came before. The only really background you need to know is basically 4 friends went on a camping trip, and one of them has just woken up in his tent. So it's morning, he's just woken up. I woke up gasping, unable to catch my breath. Drip, drip, drip. The tent was an oven. How long had the sun been up? I was suffocating in a nylon prison, my sleeping bag having acquired a stranglehold on my neck during the night. Drip, drip, drip. Great. The tent was leaking. It must have rained. The campsite was eerily quiet. Why didn't anyone wake me? Drip, drip, drip. Wiping the sleep from my eyes, I studied the nylon ceiling. Dan had committed the ultimate sin of camping. His tent was dark blue, almost black. No wonder it felt like I'd been cooked alive. It was stained too. Great patches of something dark dotted the ceiling and the walls. Some of them were still moist, and that was where the dripping sound was coming from. Drip, drip, drip. Liquid spattered on my nose, and I shot upright, wrestling with the sleeping bag. Panic squeezed my chest when the zipper stuck, but in a few seconds, I was able to work it free. As I wiped the water off my face, I caught a glimpse of my hand. It was red, bright red. That isn't water. I patted my head and face, searching for a wound. Sometime during the night, something must have cut me. It was too much blood for a mosquito bite. Shaken, I crawled out of my sleeping bag, desperate to join the others. I couldn't find anything wrong, and I wasn't in pain, but they would see the injury, whatever it was. Maybe they knew what had happened, but why had they left me alone? My nose was always stuffy in the morning, but by now it had cleared enough that I could smell my own blood, thick and heavy with the sour tang of old pennies. Inexplicably, my mouth watered, my stomach churned. It was then I noticed the other sleeping bag. Dan must have had an uneasy night too. His mummy bag was wrapped around him. Only a tuft of dark hair peeked out the top. At least he hadn't abandoned me. I was grateful I kept the keys to the truck in my pocket. I wouldn't have put it past the girls to drive back to the city and leave us stranded. Dan, I whispered. Dan, something's wrong with me. I think I'm hurt. He didn't move. Odd. And he joked the night before about being a light sleeper. I stared at him, watching for the slightest movement, but he was completely still. The silence grew more ominous. Dan. Reaching out to touch his arm, I stopped. What if he wanted to sleep in? What if he got pissed at me for waking him? As I continued to study my roommate, a chill came over me in spite of the heat. I can't see him breathe. Dan! Grabbing him by the shoulder, I shook him. To my shock, he tumbled out of his sleeping bag, or at least what was left of him did. As I knelt there in horror, too stunned to move or call for help, the severed head of Dan McGraw rolled over to rest against my knee. His eyes were huge and terrified. Vocal cords trailed out of his neck like the tentacles of a jellyfish. A spot of blood bloomed on the leg of my jeans where Dan's head touched me, as if what happened to him was contagious. Trembling, I kicked him away. His head wobbled across the tent and came to rest against the far wall. His dark eyes stared at me, accusing. You're not welcome here. I screamed, drip, drip, drip.
Yes. I found my people.
Thank you so much, JH. We'll now be hearing from JMB or GMB. It's too confusing when my own name is
Just
John.
like Voltron.
GMB Chomichuk is an award-winning writer and illustrator whose work has appeared in comics, graphic novels, books, role-playing games, film, television, and theater. He is the host of Super Pulp Science, a podcast about how genre gets made. His work in words and pictures ranges from the heartwarming to the blood-curdling. Other books by Chomichuk include Apocrypha, The Legend of Baby Metal from Z2, Will I See from Portage and Main Press, The Automatic Age, the first book in the Automatic Age saga, appropriately enough, from Great Plains and Yellow Dog, The Eye Collector from Heavy Metal, Dragon Nanny from Chasing Artwork, and Dead Work from the Dead Work Collective. So please join me in welcoming GMB Chomichuk.
Wow. Okay, two things. I didn't read ahead on your the book that you were reading from. Didn't know what you were going to read from, so apologies to my children who heard that here the first time.
Sorry.
But I think that's amazing because I do work that ranges from the heartwarming to the blood curdling. When they were much younger, they would come into the studio or into my workspace and ask, are you working on Eye Collector, Dad? Or are you working on, like, can we look at what you're working on? Can we be in the room while it's happening? And if it was, say, Dragon Nanny or something with Justin, come on in. If it was something with Jonathan, better stay out of the room. So they've been inoculated, I think. So okay. It's okay. They know that we're just making this stuff up.
I picked a passage without swearing, just in case.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, I say looking at my wife. Okay, so why are we here? I love words and I love pictures. I use them in various amounts to make different sorts of things. If there are more pictures than words, I call it comics. And if there are more words than pictures, then novels. I'm fascinated by things remote, as Herman Melville said. I love to sail forbidden seas. And I think before I do my reading, I'll tell you why Why automatic age? Why the backbone of night? I think that we must explore the dangers of possible things. By imagining them, we practice understanding them. If we understand them, we do not fear them. And when we face danger without fear, we are more likely to do what is right instead of what is easy. Why the backbone of night? Because we must, as parents, ask, what would we do if the worst happened? Why the backbone of night? I love the old covers of 1950s popular science, popular mechanics, and amazing stories. The future they promised was wondrous and strange. But most importantly for this book, the future they promised was automatic. Everything would work on our behalf. A utopia where the only extraneous thing would be, it seemed to me, people. So it's a cautionary tale and an adventure, a horror story, and a promise to myself of what a parent's job must be. So thank you to John at McNally, and Mel and Katrina, who helped make this book possible, and to Keith, who's helping me market it, and Great Plains in general. And thank you all for coming, and those of you who are out there for watching this now or in the future. I won't do any preamble because I'm going to start on page 1, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. The backbone of night. Barry and Kerion had come a long way. When the last train had brought them to this continent, it had been daytime, so they couldn't see the space elevator. But when night had fallen, Kerion had pointed it out to his son, and Barry had found himself obsessed. The backbone of night was a stack of lights, false stars that went up and up in a line until you couldn't figure out where they merged with real stars. It was an elevator that went all the way into orbit. It had taken nearly a month to get close enough to see it. And of course, once they saw it, they had to go and see it up close. I thought it was called Funny Landing. Oh, it is, but the locals don't call it that. But they didn't call it that. Is anyone left up there? Barry asked. I doubt it, but maybe, said Kerion. We're still down here, after all. The fighting had clearly been worse here than where they had come from. A more organized resistance, perhaps, or bigger defenses. The population here had been less surprised by the attack, it seemed. Whatever their preparations, though, there were now perhaps only a few hundred people alive on the earth. Automatics were rebuilding everything. Some parts of the city sprawls were literally crawling with repair robots. The automatic robotic society that had supported humanity kept right on doing what it had been designed to do. It cleaned up the messes that people made and reset each day with a promising new, deserted utopia. So Barry and Kerion had to go slowly. They had to go carefully, without alerting the automatic systems that there were still people to care for. The listless robots, which would automatically take care of them, were part of a network. The autovolts, it seemed, monitored that network for signs of humanity's remains. It was very hard to walk past restaurants and supermarkets and juice bars and produce stands and hydroponic bistro automats and robodegas and see all the unreachable delights within. For if they did step through the front doors of shops or restaurants, and the automatics whirred and clicked and opened to greet them and to treat them as they had been designed, then somewhere not far away, an autovolt would begin its inexorable march to find them. It would follow the clues of power they used until it found the remaining human occupants. Barry and Kerion survived by keeping on the move, taking what they needed, and trying to be long gone before an autovolt came to kill them. To be safe, these days, Barry and Kerion hunted stray vending machines. Christmas tree. There were a lot of odd things hanging from the tree: a bicycle, a radio, an open cooler hanging by its handle, a dozen or so individual balloons, a belt, a pair of spectacles, a raven's wing, a shoe, a child's toy train, an umbrella, a watch. In the higher branches, Barry saw a little bot, no bigger than an infant, round and chromed with long arms and prehensile hands and feet. It was dragging an office chair into the higher branches, but it was ungainly, catching on the branches and causing the top of the tree to sway. It looks like it was activated for the holiday, but no one had put out the decorations. So it just found things to hang up. I didn't think a simple bot like this could intuit a response. No, I don't think it did. I think it just misinterpreted its regular programming and took what was nearest to the regular decoration box. And when no one told it not to, it just kept at it. I think it just keeps taking the nearest objects up that tree to decorate it. They just have to do what they were built to do, Barry said. Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. Us too, I guess, said Barry. How do you mean? Well, we're afraid to die, so we keep running from it, and I guess that's what we're made to do. Kerion stopped, dropped his pack, knelt down and took his son by the shoulders. Is that what you think we're doing? Running from death? Aren't we? Oh no, son, we're living. We're running toward a life. Out there is a place where you will find happiness and rest and love and family. I believe it with all my heart. You said praying was a silly superstition. Oh, it is. Then what's the difference? What you hope will happen isn't real or likely or even possible. It's just a myth. No, son, said Kerion, picking up his pack. It's the plan. They walked a long way, nervous of every sound. They had grown accustomed to the empty streets of the automatic world, but this natural landscape of the conservation zone was full of startling things for the alert and the ignorant. Every bird and rustling animal might have been an autovolt moving to engage. They found no corpses. This arrived in their consciousness in its absence, making them aware of all the things they were used to seeing that they did not. Where is everyone? Said Barry. I don't know, better string that bow. It feels very easy for us to be snuck up on in here. I agree. Barry found a long branch and used it as a crutch, freeing his father up to watch more carefully, bow at the ready. What happened to your hand? Kerion had bound his hand tightly. The wound, though painful, reacted properly to the disinfectant coagulant gauze that he had applied. He wasn't sure he could accurately use the bow any longer, but Barry was too injured to even try. I'll tell you later, he said. They passed through the low parkway and began to climb a hill. The tops of the building peeked up into view again, and both Kerion and Barry began to relax. They made their way cautiously but carefully forward. A 3-story tall fence line ran in a curved kilometer in either direction. Left or right? Left. They went on until the wall became covered in a tall hedge of thorny brambles, which seemed like it might support the weight of a climb. Kerion didn't think Barry could make it without help, and he wasn't sure he could do it with his injured hand either, but I'll try it first, he said. No need, Dad. There's a door right over here. The door had not been opened automatically or otherwise. It was hinged and had no signs of electric power of any sort. The bramble had begun to grow across it. They pulled away the branches and there was a sign. Leaving conservation zone. Thank you for your visit. Funnyland supports all green initiatives. Barry pulled back a handful of leaves from the bars of the gate. He yanked, and they did not come. He yanked hard, and the tangle let loose. It was bound to the door, which was not locked, and Barry fell back as the door opened. There was an autovolt waiting on the other side of the door. Thank you. I missed that sound. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how we do what we do, and we're going to invite you to ask questions about how we do what we do. And you can do it politely by raising your hand. I'm sure John has some standards there, or you can just shout it out if you don't want to use the microphone or wait until then. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so the first thing I want to ask you is 16 of these things?
24, but some of them haven't been published.
So I only have a few quote unquote novels under my belt, a few that I haven't published, a few that I have published, but I find the effort of doing a page at a time to be so much different than working in comics or working in graphic novels. I can do a page at a time there, no problem, but how do you make scary things, make terrible things a page at a time and draw us into that suspense? What's your method?
Oh boy, that's a big question. Well, it sounds like you do 5 million different things.
Different, yeah.
How do I do that? One page at a time, really, as boring and prosaic as that might sound. I just keep going. Sometimes I have a word count in mind for each day that I try to hit, but now that I teach, that can go out the window pretty quickly. I have this process where the character starts talking to me and telling me their story, and I have to keep writing or I'm going to lose them. So I can't take too long away from it.
So is this character whispering to you, there's a head in a sleeping bag? Or is the character whispering like, we got to get out of the tent, something bad, and you make up the rest? Like, how is it?
It would be really that whole scene was told from the character of Reese. I changed his name. Forgot that. So Reese is actually saying to me, okay, this is what happens. And he's telling me as he discovers it, what happens. So I see the sleeping bag, I see the head. Then I see the head again, but without the body. But I see it as they see it. So it's almost like someone's on the phone to you and they're saying, hey, Greg, you know, this is what's happening step by step by step.
Just a head in a bag.
Yes.
Yes. So when I'm writing or trying to write suspenseful scenes, the only thing I know when I start a novel draft is the end. It's the only part I plot, is I know kind of the last scene. I will tend to write that last page. Everything else, then I go as far away from that as I can, and I try to find my way there. And one of the things I did particularly in this book and in the last one, which some reviewers mentioned, is that it often feels like the two characters are saying goodbye for the last time every couple of chapters. But it's because when I was writing it, I didn't know how they would get out of it. And I promised myself that if I couldn't figure out a way out, they wouldn't make it out. And so I would write each day, I would sit down and I would write them into an impossible situation that there was literally no way I could conceive of that day. So this is the end. It's the end of the book. They're dead for sure. There's no way. What I'll do tomorrow is I'll show up and I'll write, and they're dead, the end, and I can hand it in to somebody. But usually what would happen is I would go to sleep, think about it a little bit, and an idea would occur to me, or some other detail from the books, like, oh, they have that pocket knife in there. You know, there's something I've forgotten that I now remember, which is sort of like how we are when, something bad happens or someone says something mean to you and you wish you had the comeback. A day later, you know exactly what you should have said. I'm like that with murderous robots, I guess. A day later, I would know the way out. And so I would come back and, write them out of it. But, and no spoilers, I didn't find a way out for everyone in this book.
But you knew that from the beginning, like you had that ending all along?
I only had the last scene, but I actually didn't know who was talking or what was in it. So I had lines of dialogue. I had the description of the place they were in and what kind of the final line was. But I didn't necessarily know who was saying it or what the situation that led to that was. I just had this vague sense. When I'm drawing or when we're working on graphic novels, Justin Curry and I will talk about this a lot in the studio. We'll talk about an anchor image. An image that comes first. And so you draw that and you don't know why, but you just know it's part of the story. I guess that's sort of part of my writing process too, is I'll think of an image first. And so I just capture it, put it down and say, okay, that's the end. How do we get there?
I'm surprised you say that you find novels are more difficult than comic books, because to me, there's so much work that goes into a single page of a comic book, like so much line art and coloring. And
but we have so many tricks to use. Like if I want you to feel morose, I can just use color. If I want you to feel morose on a page, I have to build that a word at a time, like so carefully, right? Like you have to put so much more meticulous invention into a sentence. Whereas I can just be like, purple. That'll make you feel sad. Right. What do you find easier to write? The action or the suspense?
oh, good question. Probably the suspense. I'm thinking I love mood building from the time I was very little. I love stories, especially Stephen King. I found really excelled at this in his earlier work, that whole there's something wrong in this town. You don't know what's wrong in the town, but there's just this feeling that there's something a bit off. I love that. I've always loved that. And having grown up in a small town, I can attest there's always something wrong in the town.
I think so. My wife and I have talked about, moving out into the country or moving to, I think deep down I have a fear that I'll be the weird stranger that moves into town, right? And so maybe that's where I draw back. So if you find building the suspense sort of easier, then do you find that action beats to be more of a struggle, or you have to be more thoughtful with it? Or how does the narrator in your head tell you this is the action?
It's so hard to explain in a way, but it's just really like, say one of my characters will just be, I'll have this initial idea for a story. And then in a few days, this character will pop in my head. I swear I'm not insane, or if I am, I haven't been diagnosed. And he'll say, hi, my name's Jackson. Here's what happened to me. Here's my story. And whether it's action or suspense, they just tell me what's happening. So it's like I go along with them as this happens to them. I know it's very weird. I know it's weird.
So when I get stuck in a project, I use, basically an adjustment of the Socratic method, where I try to have an argument with myself, and I imagine that the other person in the argument knows the end of the book, and what happens in the scene. I just ask them questions about the scene. So we have similar process in that way, and then I just interrogate myself. Be like, I don't know what to write here. I'm going to ask the guy who knows. All right, is this chapter any good? Yes, it's pretty good. The suspense in it is great. Oh, really? Tell me how you built the suspense. It does. It feels like you're just talking to yourself in the library upstairs, and your kids are coming. Better keep it quiet, right, boys? But do you think it's because deep down we know the story, or deep down we're lying to ourselves that we know the story?
Oh, it's funny you asked this, because I just went through this with a page turner class yesterday, trying to talk about this exact thing. And it's like, is it our subconscious? That the subconscious has already mapped everything out? Or is it, we were talking about, some of my students went on the mystical path, like talking about muses, or is there some sort of fabric of stories woven out there that we're plucking from or accessing? To me, it's the one part of writing or of life that is true magic.
If we knew, would we like it as much?
I don't think so. I like the element of magic. I think there's too little magic in the world.
Right. Now, I have a feeling right now there's not quite enough blood on the carpet here. I kept it kind of light in my own reading. There's a few, but all the scenes that have real, horrific violence, the good part versions, are all real plot spoilers also. So I didn't want to read any of those. I just led up to something bad happening. But when you're putting the claret in, when you're splashing the walls with something bad, do you keep the audience in mind first? Do you keep the character in mind first? What do you do?
Honestly, I often keep the publisher in mind first. So if it's a Flame Tree book, there's got to be blood. If there's a Sever book, there's got to be a lot of blood. If it's my Ghostwriter series, which is more on the supernatural suspense side, then not so much. Then it's more about deep suspense, deep, psychological terror rather than gore.
I want to unpack not only the expression that you had when you said deep suspense, but the motion you made that seems made of some real decisions. What are those decisions that get you at deep suspense?
Deep suspense.
I'm going to take notes because mine are just as a robot coming and you can see it coming.
Oh, I doubt that. Well, my Ghostwriter series is basically every book is set in a different place in the world, and each one of those places has real legitimate things. Terrible things have happened, and unfortunately it's very easy to find a terrible thing that's happened anywhere. So how I think of the suspense is the ghosts of our past return to haunt us, in this case literally, but what I'm trying to do is be honest and be respectful, if that's the right word, to what has happened in that place. Bali is an example. Bali is a beautiful island in Indonesia, right? Some of you may have been there. We never think anything bad had happened there. They had a horrible massacre there in the 60s, where tons of people died because they were suspected of being communists. So my book is, the ghost in that book is a young woman who was murdered by these people who were getting rid of the communists.
This hits home because some of the reviews of Automatic Age were like, is this author a communist? Why doesn't he want this magical utopia to be here all the time? So now I'm a little nervous in my chair.
Be careful,
Yeah,
yes.
don't go to falling. So is there anyone here who has a question about how we do what we do or how stories get made? There's one right away, right there.
It's a real simple question. How did you come up with the word audible?
Oh, okay. So the question is, how did I come up with the name Audible? So here's the thing. The original Automatic Age started as a submission, a short story submission to an anthology collection that was supposed to be about toys, bad, evil toys. And I started writing, and instead of evil toys, I thought of these gigantic, clockwork, see-through androids. I was like, well, those aren't the toys. And so I built a whole world where the androids are hunting everyone, and the father and son hide in a bedroom, and the little toys, the perpetual toys, which are like running around and they can't be turned off, and they have to smash them all, was the scene. And the anthology rejected the story because they're like, it's all about these other killer robots, and there's like 20 lines of these toys. And I realized I should write that story. And in the margins of that story, I had not written Automatic Age all the way. I had written only the first part of the word. I was just rushing, so auto. And I had written another note now to the bottom of my own margin that said counting volts. And that's how they'd have to track you. And those two words together, autovolt, became what I named the. So great question. No one's ever asked me that question before. So thanks for that. Yes.
How about Robodega?
Robodega. I just, as my family will attest, love smashing words together that are a little bit silly. And so that was my way of sliding in what would be an obvious, silly marketing. You know, there are gas stations, for example, called Pump and Munch. What? Right? So I didn't think Robodega was too far off.
Not at all. Did you have any inspirations when you were growing up and starting to write or starting to draw?
Yes. Man, it's many and varied. So like, because I did all these different things, one story that I've told in other places, but never here among you, is that my mom kind of had a rule at home, which was if you could read it, then you can read it. And there was no sort of limit to what you could read. And I had originally been a little bit of a late bloomer in reading. So when I finally went all in, didn't matter that it happened to be grade 5 and I was reading Cujo, and the school librarian was like, where did you get this? And you're not supposed to have this, is not allowed. And I said, it was quite indignant. It's like, I'll read what I want. Thank you very much. I can read it. And my mother was very upset that the book had been confiscated from me. but didn't tell me quite how upset she had been. And so she brought me to the school the next day, drove me to school instead of me taking the bus, which I normally do. She's like, I'm just going to come in for a minute. I was like, wait, what? Why are you coming to the school? And she marched me to the library. And I stood outside the library while I heard the most vivid defense of kids being able to draw their inspiration from wherever. Like, you're a librarian, you should know better. And like, books are books, and just let kids read whatever they want. And I was like, I can read anything. And so then I read many things I shouldn't have read at that age, I think, knowing full well that if I would walk into the library, into the section of the librarian would watch me. And then I'd walk over to the Stephen King shelf maybe, or the Clive Barker Books of Blood, and I'd pull it off the shelf and I'd watch her, and then I'd walk back over to the middle year section and fill out the card. And the librarian would look at me and she would begrudgingly slide it over. So I think many of those inspirations for things that I ought not have been doing or ought not have been thinking about, quote unquote, really came from just, there was no censorship. And so I read comics that were probably too old for me. I read books that were probably, quote unquote, too old for me. And as a result, well, now I make them. So make of that what you will.
What an amazing mom.
She was pretty rad. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Two questions. We'll do one in the back and then one in the front.
I'll share first that when I'm working, it doesn't look like you guys are working. I'm either thinking something about numbers or accounting or buying or selling. If I have a very, very heavy day, difficult for me to sleep, or if I do fall asleep, these things are going through my head and they're popping out, and I do get solutions from time to time. If you guys are talking about what you write, I wonder how you sleep. How is it that you can get to sleep? And what is it that you think about?
Okay, so the question for the YouTube audience, which maybe didn't hear that, was I think underlying was what's wrong with us, but also how do we sleep? How do we get to sleep when we have all these things going on in our heads? How do we make sense of it? I'll let you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, mine's easy. I'm chronically sleep deprived. I have, concealer packed on under my dark eye circles right now. So hopefully they're not noticeable, but I seriously, I'm lucky if I get 5 or 4 hours of sleep a night. So it's very easy for me to sleep. If I ever do actually get to bed, it's pretty easy. I don't dream. I'm just out because I don't get very much.
See, and I'm the opposite. And much to the chagrin of many people I know, I'll just fall asleep at the drop of a hat. Guys, like I could go to sleep soundly right here. Give me 2 minutes and a little mental exercise. I sleep like a baby. But I used to wake up in my 20s, in my misspent youth, in my 20s, I would wake up and feel like, oh, I had an idea. I better write it down before it disappears. I'm kind of over that now. Now, if I wake up and there's a dream piece, I tell myself, if it survives till after coffee, it's worth writing down. But if it doesn't make it to there, then it's okay. It's fine. Because otherwise my whole life is already full of notebooks. If I had one more notebook to write down my dreams, it could be trouble. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Yes, there was one in the front.
So a question for both of you. How do you get past writer's block?
How do you get past writer's block?
You can take that one first.
Well, mine's kind of an asshole answer. I don't really believe in writer's block, but it's only because I'm switching genres so often that what's actually happening. I used to say, I don't believe in writer's block and just leave it at that. But what's actually happening is when I'm blocked in the writing, I do layouts for illustrations. When I'm blocked in the layouts, I do some graphic design work. If the graphic design work is not working, I'll just come back to some writing. And one of the ways that I combat what might be characterized as writer's block is I tell myself every day when I sit down to work, even one word, even one line, even one image is progress. So just get that. And then if I have to quit for the day, fine. But I think you probably agree, once you start, you don't want to stop. So it's really tricking yourself into starting on time and to a schedule is a big part of it.
Good answer again. With me, I'm sort of like Gregory. I don't believe in writer's block either, but I do occasionally get blocked in difficult parts where I just don't know how something's going to, particularly with my books, how it's going to end. I just don't know. And I won't want to write because it's hard. You know, that whole like, oh, it's going to be hard. I don't want to do it. So I thankfully have someone who's like an amazing brainstorm partner who will brainstorm with me, and they just have a way of.
They're worth their weight in gold, those brainstorm partners.
Yes, and even he usually doesn't come up with a solution, but he says something that's like a key turns in my head, and I've got it. But yeah, I've had some endings for sure where I've been blocked, or even just the book is really hard and it's really dark, and it's just like, oh, I don't want to. It's not that I can't, I just don't want to.
I have a follow-up question that spins out of this, because one of the types of writing that I've never considered myself fit to do is journalism. And I think partially because the deadline's today, like the assignment is today, and the deadline is also today, and everything you have to figure out, oh, that's today. How?
But you were a teacher, remember all that marking you had to get done today?
Oh, my secret to marking, as all my students will know, is I didn't mark anything.
You didn't?
No.
How'd you do that?
Marking is a waste of every teacher's time. Don't do it.
Wow.
Don't do it. Mark everything out of 3. I'll tell you right now. Here's the system. Mark everything out of 3. 3 points if you did more than I asked. 2 points if you did exactly what I asked. 1 point if you did less than I asked, and 0 if you did nothing. And you get the students to self-select their own work. Then you're done.
Would that have flown actually?
It works. It works. 10 years in the classroom, very little marking.
Wow, I'm so envious now. I'm gonna cry.
But you dodged the answer.
Oh, so journalism, what was the question?
How do you do it? How can you be given a deadline and an assignment and hand it in all in the same day without just saying like F this and flip the whole desk and run out?
Well, with journalism, you're often doing 4 or 5 things by the end of the day. Yeah, not just one. So thankfully, there's this wonderful program in Winnipeg, Creative Communications, that our journalism class was at 9 a.m. You had to go out, you had to find a journalism story on your own as a student. Sometimes we went to the law court, sometimes we went to the cop shop and heard the police talk about what had happened that day. Or the
Do you think anyone caused crimes just so they could cover them?
You know, I was going to write a fiction story about that. But actually, you know what somebody did? Someone wrote, I don't know if anyone remembers the Homolka case, like the Kerion and Barry killers. 2 of my classmates broke the publication ban on the college radio and sent out a media release about it. So they used the PR learning to send out a media release. And then, yeah, they were radio students and they locked the door on the station manager. And he was like trying to break the door down and get everybody in. And yeah, they broke the teal ban. And then it turned out our journalism teacher was behind the whole thing.
The plot thickens.
Exactly. Those were the days. But I think you have to be a fast writer to succeed in that world in daily journalism. And it almost becomes, there's such a formula to journalism, the inverted pyramid, where everything important goes at the top and it trickles down. It's almost like a puzzle piece. And the really hard thing is getting the lead, getting that first line. And once you have that first line, it's almost like you can just see it. You can just see it all come out like a puzzle. You know exactly then what quote goes, then the transitional sentence,
right.
And the quote.
See, this is why I'm not good for journalism, because I have the end first, not the beginning. Yes.
But you could work back up. And the end of journalism is usually, for more information, please check their website. That's usually the end of journalism. It's very riveting.
Yeah. Okay, so riveting. Are there any writers in the crowd? Anyone who's struggling with a manuscript right now that wants to share theirs with? How do you solve these problems?
I don't think I've solved them yet.
You haven't solved them. You can see that we haven't solved them either.
I do have a question though.
Question. Okay.
How do you know when your work is ready to publish?
Great question. I'll leave it to you because I'll let you go first. How do you know if your work is ready for the publisher?
When it's done.
How do you know when it's done?
Well, I'll write the first draft and then I always go over it and do a second draft and then it's ready to go. I'm kind of at the point now where I don't take too long with drafts, but it's partly because I have so many deadlines. So it's not like in the old days, right? When I was writing for myself, I'd have, I may spend years working on a book and then find out that, like we talked about, 100,000 words of it needs to go. But now I've done it so long, I guess it's just become now, I know when it's done, and I wish there was a better answer to that. It just kind of ends.
See, for me, when I'm tired of looking at it, I take a ready or not, here I come approach. And so I have something, I think maybe it's, and then I start submitting, and I play a game where I try to collect a rejection a week, find something to send out so that someone will tell me, no, this is not good. And it becomes a process by which I get used to rejection, which I think is essential if you're going to work in the printed world, to get used to rejection. But also, as soon as I've sent it, I have this moment where, oh, I know what it's missing. But it only happens once I know someone else is going to read it. It's like there's a little trigger in me. And so then I'll fix that part before the next submission. So, a lot of it is just tricking your subconscious into giving you some answers that, you probably knew all along if you just, got a better night's sleep, maybe.
Well, and they're going to change it anyways. Don't you find? So I don't want to stress over it too much anymore, because the editors are going to change it anyways.
Yeah, there is no, in any media that I have worked, there's no draft that I brushed my hands up and said, I'm done, which was ever finished. There's always some bettering, some fixing, some tinkering, some adjustment, and some of those are market forces. Someone says like, oh, no, it's just, this isn't the month for that kind of thing. And sometimes it's editorial insight, like someone has a really great way to improve it. And sometimes it's editorial direction, which is, I think, important to point out, is different than insight. They have a change that they want made, and that's part of your job, is to make those changes when asked. Let me ask you this: have you ever staunchly refused to make an editorial or insightful change and just died on that hill? Been the zipped up head in the sleeping bag of that?
I usually go along with what I'm told, even if I don't agree at the time, and I find out later, like, oh, I'm so glad I did. With me, quite often it's titles. I had the story. And it's funny, through this, I'm realizing how much we have in common, because my first printed book was about cursed toys.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I had this great idea. It was this teddy bear that this boy can get rid of. Whenever he tried to get rid of the teddy bear, the same thing would happen to him. Like if he tried to drown the teddy bear, someone tried to drown him, and so on. Couldn't get rid of this bear. So I thought, what a great title. It bears repeating.
That's exactly the kind of title I would come up with.
My editor didn't agree. They're like, how about the bear who wouldn't leave? And I'm like, oh, that's so obvious. They were right.
Yeah.
They were right.
They are right.
Yes.
Right. It's like Robodega. I probably shouldn't have gotten that past the editor, but there it sits. Any other questions before I cross-examine JH some more? I feel like there's a few. There's a few of you who are wondering, is my question relevant? Is my comment relevant? I assure you that it is. Because most of the time, those of us up here don't know much more than those of you over there. The only difference is we're sitting over here. So we might be able to learn a thing or two. If not, I will ask you this question. In comics, I control the page turn. I can lay it out so that what you see that's bad happens here. So it's your fault if you saw it. How do you set the pace knowing that somebody can glance to the right and get the spoiler just a few inches away? Dialogue is particularly bad for me for this. I'll scan dialogue quickly and I'll be like, oh, that's what happens.
Oh, wow. I never even thought of that. One thing I do make sure of is that, especially for page turners, that the chapter endings and chapter starts have to grab you. I'm also an editor, and I'll get lots of manuscripts to edit where it's like the chapter starts with the character getting out of bed in the morning. and then they go about their day.
Right.
And then it ends with the character going to bed. I'm like, don't resolve anything. Don't resolve anything at the end of a chapter.
Right.
So I've never thought about that, about what they could see on the other page, because I never know how it's going to be laid out.
Yeah. I think, so don't resolve anything before the end of the chapter.
No.
Unpack that a little bit.
Well,
There's like 150 unresolved chapters in here, so I'm feeling like really seen right now, but I just want to hear some more about.
well, you're always making promises to the reader, right? When you write a book, you're always making promises. So if you turn this page, you'll find out if Dan is, what's wrong with Dan, right? If you turn this other page, you'll find out what happened to Dan. If you turn this other page, you're going to find out what happened to the rest of the friends. But the trick is to deliver on some of those promises and to hold some of them back. So with some of the manuscripts I'll get, it's almost like the writer wants to put everything right in the first few lines. It's like, I want to tell you everything about this world and everything these characters have ever gone through right now.
Right now.
In the first 50 pages.
Overwriting.
Yeah. Or just not trusting themselves that they can hold back a little bit, right?
Do you think that's inherent in our fear that no one will ever read it, so we better get it all out quick? Like when you're first drafting, right? Like when you're like, oh, maybe.
They're not trusting themselves enough, I think, to like know that they can hold back a bit. It's like, but I need to tell you about like the pink house and the curtains, and if I don't tell you what they ate for dinner, it's all lost. You just need to be confident that they're going to stick with you and that they can figure out some stuff for themselves. That's really important, I find.
So getting back to the bloody stuff, what do you cut and why most often?
Do
you have your own like? I'll lead this. I'll lead the question a little with my own answer. I find what I'm doing when I'm writing is I tell a little too much, and then I go back and I cut away the front so that it's a mystery. What they're talking about maybe is a little bit of a mystery. What already happened is a bit of a mystery. And then through dialogue, we're going to get a little piece of the puzzle, and through exposition, we'll get a little piece. But if you hope that it'll all be there in one or the other, don't read my books. You got to kind of figure it out along the way. That's sort of like how I piece it together. But if you like to be like, oh no, he's dead? Really? And you got to find out what happened, even though just one page turned away, they were happily eating sandwiches, right? So I'm cutting away information in most cases. What do you cut?
Well, for me, it takes place in the first draft, and it'll be say a conversation's going on too long, or there's been too much talking. I'll be like, this is boring. Something bad has got to happen. So it's more in the first draft where it's like I'll realize that there's just been too long a conversation or too much information, so something bad will happen. Or I'll switch to, if there's a really tense scene and you really want to know what happens next, I'll switch to another character.
Right.
Because I'm evil.
You're one of those. Yeah, I'm always like, but Billy. All right, interesting. Any other questions shook loose from that?
I know there's more writers hiding.
I know there are, and they're wondering. Maybe, yes, question.
Make so many characters, figure out which ones to use.
Oh, great question. My own son has asked me something here, which is, how do I end up with so many characters? Because I'm constantly generating characters and character drawings and character bits, and they see me doing this all the time. And then I'll pick a few, I'll just zone in on some, and those are the main characters. I think what might be underlying the question is, why do you pick the boring ones to be the main characters when there's all these weird ones on the floor of the library? But really, how I pick characters is they've spoken to me. As we said before, I hear the voice, I hear the line of dialogue, and then I build the person around the phrase or statement. Who would say that? Why would they say that? Where would they be when they said a thing like that? And then a sort of picture forms for me of that person in prose writing. Anyway, that's how it is. In comics, you just draw them and there they are. But
I have a question actually for you.
Okay.
I warned you about this one. So you actually do this full time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage your time? How do you make it, especially if you're working from home, which I assume you are, and you have a family? How do you manage your time and make sure that you get done what you need to get done? How do you keep from getting distracted?
Well, earlier, I would have said, you know, I would have made the trite answer, which is you just need a room of your own, you close the door, and there's, you know, you just try to tell them you can't, you know, you can't interrupt. The truth is, though, that's impossible. It's just not tenable. And I cannot say a time in the last, say, 10 years where I had 20 minutes of uninterrupted thinking. Even if I said, please don't interrupt me. It's not my family's fault. Sometimes it's the phone rings, sometimes it's the email ping, sometimes it's whatever, but there's so many distractions in life that I've now kind of become a little bit better at saying life is the important part, and I'll come around to this and I'll just keep working. The one word is progress helps me a lot. Right? Oh, I got distracted. I didn't know where I was. What was the one word I managed to get before I was interrupted? But a more specific answer is that I keep a pretty regular writing schedule. In the mornings, I try to do something new and something without any rules, something with no publisher attached, no, you know, it's just raw creation, drawing, writing, whatever. Try to make something new so that later in the day when I'm exhausted and there's the have-tos, I can dream and pontificate about that idea I'm going to get back to tomorrow. And so it's like, if I get this part done, I can go back to that unfinished thing. I love unfinished things, those forbidden seas I talked about. It's partially why I switch genres and media so often, I think, is that procrastination feels like progress also. I'm always working, but sometimes it's just this thing got a little bit, and this thing got a little bit, and this thing got a little bit. As far as the work-life balance, let's do a show of hands from my family. There's 3 of you. How many of you think I tend to prioritize my work over my family? Oh, I was really scared actually, because I've trained them to be honest. I've been really encouraging honesty, but no hands up. How many of you, show of hands, 3 of you here from the family, think that when you interrupt, I'm going to be mad? Okay, 1. We got 1 of 3.
One sort of.
He's waving his hand. So it's not perfect, I think, is the bottom line. Right? You don't know. You know, we never know how we're going to screw up our kids, is really what it comes down to. It's already happened. You guys are ruined somehow by something I've done. It already happened. And so we just try to do our best. But in terms of getting things done on time, picking good collaborators, I have 2 in the crowd here right now, is a good way to make sure that people who are doing their work, the standard of their work is so amazing that you feel like you got to meet them where they're at. You have to meet them where they are. You have to, you know, get out there. So whenever I'm feeling really like, I don't know if I'm good enough, I don't know if it's right, I don't know if I reach for a collaborator, and then we start working together. And usually I reach for people who I think are better, smarter, more driven, more capable. And in that way, I'll try to rise to that challenge, right? You seek mentors even in your collaborators, I find.
That's really cool. And that's something I think people who just focus on novels, something we miss, unless we have a co-writer, but that's a rare thing because it can be very, very isolating sometimes.
Now there's the cliche of the horror writer, you know, there's a cliche of the horror writer. Tell me about your writing process. Like, what is your perfect horror writing day?
I get writing done. Perfect horror writing day. John narrates it, obviously. Well, I got to spend a night in a haunted house here at Delaware Museum, and that was probably the perfect writing day. Yes, writing a ghost story in a haunted house, having something creepy happen. Went downstairs, did a nice reading for people there to remind me that yes, people are actually waiting for this book. Went up, something creepy happened, wrote a story about it. That was pretty much a perfect writing day for a horror writer.
Okay, so those of you wondering how to get a horror story done, haunted house, supernatural occurrence, and people waiting downstairs for the finished story, right? I think that's a wonderful place for us to stop. Thank you so much for sharing your process with me and with all of us. And a round of applause for you guys for being such a great audience. Thank you so much. Is John lurking?
Hello. So yes, we have reached the end of the evening, but that doesn't mean we're completely finished. There is a signing now. So we'll ask you all to just wait in your chairs for one moment, and we're going to take Gregory and JH over to the table, which is just beside our cash desk. There are books up there, so please do avail yourself of a book when you reach the table if you'd like to get it signed. Just please do remember to pay for the book before you leave. You will notice that the store is actually closed. We do close at 8 o'clock today, but rest assured we will not be booting you out. All we ask is that you please just remain roughly in the area of the signing table, and then you can get book signed to your heart's content. It's been wonderful to be able to celebrate here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much for coming out, for your questions, for joining us here tonight. Thank you to all those watching on YouTube now and in the future. The video will remain live if you want to revisit it at any point or share it with anyone. And now I'll just ask you all to join me in one final round of applause for H Moncrief and GMB Chomichuk. Thank you all so very much.